For the third time in 2 years, a federal NDP member of parliament has introduced a bill that would see Canadians thrown in jail potentially for their speech. Winnipeg Centre MP Leah Gazan recently introduced a private member's bill, C-254. This could criminalize residential school denialism. This is the second time Gazan has done this. She introduced an identical bill in the 44th Parliament. Now, here with some thoughts on continued threats to our free speech is David Leis. He is the president of the Frontier Centre for Public Policy, and he's also the host of Leaders on the Frontier, which is part of Return to Reason, which airs on Miracle Channel. So, David, good to have you with us again.
Good to be here, Paul.
Well, first of all, I don't think anyone is denying that some Indigenous students were ill-treated at Indian residential schools. However, Bill C-254 really seems to be an extreme response from what I'm seeing so far. What do you make of the ongoing discussion around the alleged unmarked graves at the Kamloops Indian Residential School?
Well, the good news is that there's been no evidence of mass graves at Kamloops and nor any other locations. There have been some investigations, and the good news is that they've confirmed that they're rocks or anomalies or tree roots.
Yeah,
So,
this
you
is
know, the
ground
bottom line is,
penetrating. This is ground penetrating radar that they used, right? So they see things, but
Mhm.
it can't give you the details exactly of what it is. But yet the assumption, well, the news release said, these are the remains of 215 children, right?
Right.
That's a big
Yeah, and
step.
that was later retracted, Paul,
Okay,
because there's no evidence. And frankly, the whole history of residential schools is long and complex over many years.
sure.
Most people did not, or among Aboriginal communities, did not attend them. Um, it varies considerably, maybe 15 to 30% attended them. It was all
Okay.
voluntary up until the 1940s. It depends on the date in question in the province. But the bottom line is that this type of bill is really an affront to both the history and facts, I would argue, but also, most importantly, it's an attack on freedom of speech. We need freedom of speech in our society so that we can search for the truth. And we base our truth based on evidence and healthy debate and discussion, not on threatening people, creating an ethos of fear to shut down those people that may not hold your narrative, that somehow residential schools were like the Holocaust. They were like concentration camps, which we know that is obviously an absurd proposition.
Well, you and I would agree that it's obvious, but it would seem that for some people in Canada, and maybe more than we realize, they're not seeing this as obvious. I think there's a generation being told that, this really was like a cultural genocide at least, right? So what does that mean? I mean, we know that Indigenous children actually died at the schools, right? But correct me if I'm wrong, but was this not predominantly from outbreaks of tuberculosis? I mean, yeah, I think we perhaps assume, or we're buying the narrative that most of these kids were murdered. That's not the case, is it?
No, no, it isn't. In fact, if you read the entire Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report, which I have read, which is
That's
a
3,600
massive document of
pages.
some 3,600 pages. So,
Wow. Okay.
part of what happens here, Paul, is the dynamic that persons who cast this simplistic, almost like a cartoonish narrative
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
somehow residential schools were like concentration camps are banking on the idea that no one will ever read this report or do the heavy lifting and
Mm.
research.
Hmm.
And in fact, there's a whole series of groups of, I think, dedicated Canadians who have done that kind of research. And the facts simply don't support that kind of bizarre narrative. And I think what's so sad about it is that it basically is disrespectful to not only the people who served in those schools that went to remote locations over some, wow, 145 years to be able to serve and love those children and educate them. It also does a disservice, I think, to the parents who sent those children there, who also cared about them. And I think it does a disservice to the attendees who were there, the children, because that's not that story. And I think to be able to somehow cast that kind of dark narrative is really a disservice to history and the truth.
Yeah, and again, we always want to put a caveat in there. We do understand that there were certainly students who were abused, and there were bad things that happened in some schools. But to make it law that it would be illegal for someone to say that there were students and parents who had very good experiences at some residential schools, you know, wow. So if you're questioning the narrative, this becomes criminal. That
Well,
really
okay, so
raises
Paul,
red
just to be
flags for
blunt,
me. But
uh,
yeah, sure.
yeah, and to be very clear, Paul, the irony to this type of bill is that the authors then of the TRC report itself should go to jail because within the TRC report are numerous positive stories about how people attended residential schools, they learned valuable skills, all in an effort to try to help people move into the Industrial Revolution at the time. I mean, this goes back over 150 years ago. It's hard to imagine those conditions. And I think what's also ironic is that
Okay.
the former chair of the TRC was the Senator Murray Sinclair, who said, I believe it was in a 2009 interview with the Calgary Herald, said that all stories need to be told, both the good, bad, and the ugly of residential schools. So he himself recognized that residential schools were complex and there were a variety of stories, all needing to be told in terms of what happened.
Wow. We can't just cherry pick and say, this is my truth. Uh, you know, let's just get the truth out there. And after all, it is called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, right? So truth needs to be forefront with this whole thing here. And I think we have a lot of assumptions that we make. We assume that, all Indigenous children who attended the residential schools were forced into the schools. And as you pointed out earlier, they were actually, I mean, there's certainly cases of that happening, and that I think is wrong. However, apparently, correct me if I'm wrong here again, but my understanding is that there was actually a lineup of parents wanting to send their kids to the residential schools to get, basically, quote unquote, a white man's education to get a leg up, to keep up with the changing world, to have a better chance at success in life. Is that accurate?
So yes, by and large, residential schools, the process was that chiefs and their councils requested the crown to set up residential schools, and you can understand why, because those communities care for their children, and they wanted at that time to be able to enable them to succeed, to get the education that they could have the skills to move forward in different professions, and the proof is that for many students that did work, and for others it was a very challenging situation because the role of those residential schools did change over time, where they were also a place where if there was a difficult family circumstance or situation on reserve, those children could be sent to, pardon me, those children could be sent to a residential school to help them to be in a better situation. So the stories are complex. There's many different residential schools across the country. So you have to look at the facts and evidence of each one of them. So what concerns me is that this type of bizarre legislation is designed to create fear and to intimidate people from daring to ask questions about our history. And we know that our civilization has been empowered by debate and to be able to go through the scientific method, to be able to look at facts and evidence to seek the truth. And so if we intimidate people and threaten others that may not agree with our narrative or worldview and threaten them with jail time, this will end our civilization. This is just one of these basic principles that is foundational to our society.
Yeah, well said. Free speech is absolutely necessary, especially in a democracy. Okay. So let me ask you, how does this private member's bill differ from something like the Bill C-63, which would regulate what a person can say online?
hmm Well, I think you'd have to go through the specifics, and they are different. I would say, though, as a category, as a kind of a general category of law, they have eerie similarities. The similarities are insofar as it's, again, It's the attempt by those in power to regulate our thoughts, to regulate the information that you might have, to be basically a bully pulpit, to force those people to somehow fall in line with particular narratives. And that's wrong. We need to have not less discussion in our society, but more. We need to have more debate about what is going on as we try to serve each other and to build a better society that serves Canadians, not those in power.
Mm-hmm. You're being told what to think as opposed to how to think. And that's problematic in my view.
I think part of it is it's driven by persons that are truly power seekers. They seek to um, craft their narrative for political purposes to serve their special interest groups. There's also an ideological side. There's some people that actually believe that residential schools were concentration camps. So how dare anyone question that? Um, I think it's also based on this kind of pattern in history, Paul, where people in power in history seek to control the masses. They seek to control the people for their own ends. And I think that's what's driving it.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of our viewers who are concerned about this. And any thoughts on what we can do to, stand up to this sort of thing and hopefully not allow it to go through?
Well, citizens have a lot of power if they choose to speak up. And that's the
Hmm.
problem is a lot of people are frankly taught the whole idea that they should be fearful to speak up, that they should somehow, their opinion doesn't matter. Well, pick up the phone and talk to your representative. Tell them that you care about these issues. And quite frankly, we need to renew the teaching of these basic principles of rights and freedoms to the next generation. We just mark the occasion of Remembrance Day. Why did those people die in terms of freedoms? Well, this is an example. We need to speak up and at least do that out of the comfort of our homes so that we can be able to make the point that we will not just simply go quietly in the night, but we need to be able to speak up for the truth and safeguard those rights of freedoms of freedom of speech. Otherwise, you'd be shocked how quickly they can fade away. And we need to teach these in our schools, and we need to not take them for granted.
Most private members' bills don't actually get enough support to get passed in the House of Commons. So I guess that's the good news. Your thoughts, though, in the current political climate, what are the odds of C-254 getting passed?
I honestly don't know. I think that if I had to take a guess, I think they're low. But I think what is disturbing that this type of bill is even proposed in our parliamentary system. Shame on any MP or others that would propose this in modern day Canada in 2025. And I think that concerns me. I think that should concern every Canadian that this is even seen as appropriate within a House of Commons that is built on the tradition of freedom of speech and debate.
I'm out of time here. David, thanks so much for your time.
It's been an honor to join you, Paul.